going to turn the program over to today's chair, Nina Riccio-Cuddy. Nina?
Good morning, everyone. I think that everyone knows George Latimer. He's our county executive. He's been a fixture in Westchester politics and particularly in our local community, and we are grateful for his many years of hard work and wonderful service. When we decided to invite George to attend the first summit of the September season, we went through a number of questions that were on our mind, and we sent George a list of issues that were of concern to us with a number of questions. Rather than go through each one, which George can certainly do for you when he makes his presentation, I think to broadly describe what we asked is for George to explain to us what is the current state of the economy of the county and what does he see as the road to recovery after the pandemic. And we asked him also to consider what kind of assistance can be afforded to local municipalities and what kind of impact we might see on taxes, programs, or services, and what assistance, if any, would be available to local businesses. We also asked George to address the current infection rate. How is the county prepared should there be a recurrence of the virus? And what changes should be considered to strengthen the county's healthcare system? We also asked George to talk about the problem that may be facing many of our poorer and minority communities in terms of potential evictions. So there is an expectation that there will be an increase in evictions, and we wanted George to address what we expect to see, what assistance may be available to landlords and tenants, and if he would support a right to counsel legislation in eviction proceedings. And then finally, we asked George what his plans are after his term of office is over. I'm not sure he's going to tell us, but that's the broad outline of what we asked George to address. And we are really grateful that he's come. He's always been so supportive of the summit. So the program's all yours, Mr. County.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Elaine. Good to almost see everybody out there and to know when I look into the chat room how many friends are here. Since I'm a regular attendee at the summit, I kind of know the flow here. I'll try to keep my prepared comments brief. We'll get to the questions that Nina's raised, and then I guess there'll be sufficient time if I talk quickly to take other questions that come up either in the chat room or however you're going to handle this. The first bit of information, if you live in the village of Larchmont, today is Village Election Day. The polls are open. They will close at 9 o'clock. You'll be voting for members of the Village Board of Trustees and do your civic duty. We got a bigger civic duty in November where we elect other positions like President of the United States. But for today, in the village of Larchmont, village elections, and we encourage you to go out and vote. I'm sure most of you know that already, but just a good reminder. I was just in the panelist chat room before we got started, remembering that I was at the Larchmont Mamanic Summit 19 years ago on September 11th, when there was a summit meeting with the Mamanic Diner that particular day. I think Cheryl Louie was speaking, and when the terrible tragedy at the World Trade Center occurred, and it reminds me how long this organization has been around, meeting, speaking to people. My two predecessors have both been here, and I've spoken in all my different iterations of public office. But I think there's something to be said for an organization like this, where people get together and they question not just elected officials, but other interesting topics and people. And there's not many organizations like this around the county now that I have the countywide focus. So even on a day where we're all sitting in our homes, this is not my home. This is my backdrop. Shows you near where I live, but not exactly what I see out my window, but that we can get together to do this. So let me get into some of the generalities. Everybody says the same thing, cliche, there's no roadmap. We've never been down this street before. We haven't. Whether we're dealing with, should we open beaches and pools? And if so, how would we do it in the county government? How will we close the budget gap? This is all unknown territory. And we're working through it as we can. It was important to me when I became county executive a few years ago to hire what I thought was the best possible team. I kept most of the county team in place. I did not fire commissioners, even though they had worked for my predecessor, different political party. But I did bring in some people, Ken Jenkins, Deputy County Executive, Joan McDonald, our Director of Operations, well-experienced people, John Nona, County Attorney, because it's in a moment like this that you find out how good you are, and not you, the person, but the team that you put together. Because nowhere in the campaign of 2017 did we ever envision a pandemic. Did we ask questions about what would you do in a pandemic? What would your decision model and process be? Because we didn't anticipate it. None of us did. So here we are. And the first bit of news, I'll take one of your questions out of order, which is where are we today in our status? Westchester hit, like most of New York metropolitan area, hit a peak of infection in late March, early April. It hit here first. It hit here fast. But although we were the first, we did not turn out to be the worst. We at one point were ahead of New York City, the two counties on Long Island, but we have fallen in behind them with a peak set of circumstances that was difficult, but did not overtax the health system. What we saw on television from Wuhan, China, and from Italy, Lombardy in Italy, in the early stages of this, was that the infection rate spread so much that the local hospital bed count, the doctors, the PPE were not sufficient to handle it. We flattened the curve in time here in Westchester County in, say, up to about mid-April or so, when the infection had risen, exponentially, and then was put under some kind of management. We at our worst had 1,200 people hospitalized. We have 3,100 beds in Westchester County, so that was the number. If we had broken 3,000 hospitalizations, we would have had a problem. We were close to running out of ventilators, but we never did run out of ventilators. We had PPE. Sometimes it was, at 9 o'clock, we got what we needed to cover us for 10 o'clock, but we managed to stay on the right side of these situations. Over the last 3 to 4 months, the infection numbers and the total numbers are much more manageable. Because we're counting year to date in total number of people infected, we've had over 37,000 cases of people testing positive for COVID, but we've tested 600,000 people, a little under 600,000 people. And that does include some duplicate and triplicate testing. So as a percentage, we're running about 8%, give you a round number, 8% positive out of everybody tested, 92% negative, and that's good. Now, a negative test does not mean you're negative forever. It means at the moment you took the test, you're negative. You could, in theory, be positive later. But 92 out of 100 is a good sign in terms of the aggregate amount of testing. Of the 37,000, it's like 37,700 people that tested positive at some point in time or another, 36,000 of them plus have gone through the 2-week incubation period and have been cleared of COVID. They might have gotten a little sick at home. They might have gone to the hospital, but whatever it was, they cleared it and they came out. So as of this moment today, we have 587 active cases. That means people that have tested positive and are within the 2-week period of time. That number is higher than it was 2 weeks ago, but it's significantly lower than when we had 12,000 active cases in the peak period of time. One of the indicators we look for every day, how many people were tested and how many people tested positive. And if that percent is 1%, give or take, then we're in good shape. So if we have 5,000 people tested and 50 people test positive, that's a 1% infection rate. And right now we've been at or below 1% for quite a while. That is good news. It does mean that there's more absolute number of people tested positive, but it's not manifesting itself in the number of people that are hospitalized, because that's the next gradation. You get tested positive, but do you wind up becoming sick? And if you're sick enough to go to the hospital. And the last time we were calculating on Saturday, the last number we saw, 38 people are hospitalized for COVID at this moment in time. That's a little higher than it was 2 weeks ago. We had about 25, 28 people 2 weeks ago. Right now it's 38, but that number has stayed in that range, 35 to 45, down to the mid-20s, back and forth over the last 3 months. So that's a good indicator. And then the final indicator, which is obviously the worst of all indicators, is fatalities. We have lost 1,453 people to COVID. That is a significant number of people. That's probably about 4% of everybody infected at some point in time. But we have lost only a handful of people over the last 2 months. And so the trend line has dropped. We had nights in Westchester County where we had 35, 40, 45 deaths per night, consecutive nights because of COVID. We had to rent refrigerator trucks to deal with the civilian deaths that happened. And that has never happened before in our history. So we had to deal with fatality management, which is a phrase I never heard of. But that happily is behind us now. Now, you're a fool if you say you're controlling it, because you're not controlling it. We don't have a vaccine. We don't have an antiviral. Medical science will tell us when we have it. You don't need to hear politicians, me or anybody else tell you, oh, very soon. Let's let medical science tell us what they know when they know it. In the meantime, we're trying to manage it. We manage it by masks. We manage it by hand sanitizing. We manage it by social distancing. We manage it by canceling things. We did not open Playland Amusement Park this year. We did not have fireworks this year. We did not have the ethnic festivals at Kensico Dam. Those were decisions to manage the spread by not having certain events. And the town and the villages did the same thing, and we did it all across Westchester County. Other parts of the country haven't done that. They still have the motorcycle ride in Sturgis, South Dakota, which is going to bring 250,000 people on motorcycles together. You can bet the motorcycle guys are not going to have masks on. So it's how you respond to this, in addition, that will tell us how our infections are. But at this stage of the game, we're still waiting to see what the impact of back to school is, and we're waiting to see what happens as we enter flu season, and we're hopeful. Part of the question was, how is our infrastructure? We are as prepared as we can be if the second wave looks like the first wave or is a little worse than the first wave, but we don't know. And if the infection rates as we get into the fall were to spike high, then we would have to shut things down that we've opened up. Now, the governor has made those decisions. He's made the decisions in most cases. We control our parks and recreation programs, but he controls whether or not restaurants are open, whether or not gyms and health clubs are open. When he has lifted certain things through these phases, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, so forth, that happened in June, it's the county's responsibility, the county's health department responsibility, to help work with the local business or the local entity to come up with the protocol that will work for public health. And we have to supervise that process. But we are a partner with the local government of the local business. We're not the decision maker. The decisions are made in Albany and so forth. And our state legislators, Steve Otis and Shelley Mayer, have really been terrific. I've been on numerous calls with them. They have made an outstanding effort to dialogue in larger groups of legislators to try to argue for and defend for the policies that make the most sense here locally. We have regular municipal calls with our municipal officials, Lorraine Walsh, Tom Murphy, their representatives, Nancy Seligson, their representatives are on these calls. We exchange information. We do them every Monday at 3:30, and hopefully that helps us. So to wrap up where we are with the coronavirus in terms of the statistics, we have managed it as best as we think we can. And I think probably the biggest factor is Westchester residents have embraced, to the greater extent, not universally. You'll always find people that aren't wearing masks or whatever, but to the greater extent, we have embraced the rigor that we have to show. And the comparison is, go into New York City, go into the Bronx and Manhattan, see what you see. Go into some of the rural parts of New York State, which I did over the summertime, and see what you see. And you're not seeing the same percentage of compliance that you're seeing in Westchester. So I'd rather compliment the people of Westchester than take any praise for that. You asked about the fiscal situation, and the fiscal impact of shutting the society down has been dramatic. When you shut down all of the retail stores, you shut down the restaurants in the month of March, and you slowly reopen them, and some of them didn't make it. We know stores in our communities that did not survive this loss of revenue. We hurt the economy. We particularly impacted the revenue stream for sales tax, which means more to the county than it does to the municipal governments. Municipal governments have a stream of sales tax revenue. It is important to them. They lost a significant percentage of that, but it is not a higher percentage of their revenue as it is for the county government, and even more so for the state government. It's one of the two major revenue streams at the state. It is right now the larger revenue stream for the county. So we have estimated at our worst, we had about $150 million hole to plug in our current budget, $2.1 billion budget. Now keep in mind, we had fiscal improvement made in this budget after we constructed it from the end of last year. We were able to cut property taxes a little bit. We were able to invest money in capital expenditures. But when the pandemic hit, projections of sales tax revenue dropped off the page. Along with it, hotel tax revenue, which we have in Westchester County. Some local governments have hotel tax authority, City of Rye, City of New Rochelle, but it's not a major revenue stream for them. It's not a major revenue stream for us either, but we lost revenue. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is we looked at a gap of about $150 million. We took some actions right off the bat. were not actions that I preferred to do. I argued when I ran for office, these were not prudent things to do, but in a crisis, we did them. And in so doing, we probably chopped about $60 million off of that gap, get it down to about 90 million. A month ago, 2 months ago, we initiated a voluntary severance program for Westchester County employees in which we incentivized them to leave the employment of the county. And we had 5% of our workforce, 226 people, voluntarily take the package and leave. Many of these people were at a point in their life where they didn't want to come back to work. They were concerned about COVID, or they reached a point in their life where they were ready to move and do something else with their life. So no one was pushed, but those jobs departing now gives us the ability to restructure the government and save some money on salaries without necessarily having to go to layoffs. But the three big factors that will determine whether we land the budget by the end of the year, on budget, will involve, number one, how much sales tax revenue do we think we're going to get in the closeout of the year? As most of us know, more people shop for back to school and then at the holiday season than they do at any other time of the year. So those are the two big areas, sales tax. And of course, the holiday season is the big sales tax generator. We don't know what we're going to see when the holiday season comes yet. That's unknowable for us at this point. The second big X factor is whether or not the state is going to devolve costs down to us. And they'll do that by withholding reimbursements of things that they would send. And by the way, this is not the state legislators making these decisions. It's the executive branch of the government. The governor has the authority to withhold money that we're due, but he'll say he doesn't have the money to give it to us, so I can't give it to you. And then my gap starts to grow when I don't get reimbursed for things that we were rightfully entitled for reimbursement. And then the third factor is the one you hear talked about all the time on TV. Will the federal government and the HEROES Act that passed the House, will they include in their assistance, will they help local governments, including municipal governments, county governments, and state governments, with additional funds to help us balance our budgets? And we didn't do anything fiscally improper to fall into these situations. What happened societally. If anything, the northern states were punished because we took more aggressive action than other states did. And some of the states did come around to that later on. And that may be our saving grace, because when Arizona municipalities and Mississippi municipalities have problems, then all of a sudden the guys that weren't sympathetic to New York and Massachusetts, they may all of a sudden say, yes, we need to help these local governments because their local governments are involved in the same way. So we find out just what we can expect to recover in sales tax from now to the end of the year. When we see exactly what the state does and exactly what the feds do, will tell us where we are. We have to have a balanced budget. I will have to cut spending in order to do that if I don't have any other revenue streams. And we're going to try to make those decisions as necessary and not, say, well, you know what, I'm going to start preemptively laying people off or having furloughs or cutting back on various services. I want to see how these things play out. And I'm quasi optimistic that we will make it through this cycle. Now, when you look to the 2021 budget, how are we going to bounce back out of that? That's a different situation. We don't know if there's going to be any COVID cares money for next year. And let's be candid, a lot of it has to do with who's in power after January 21st, the incumbent administration or the challenger administration. And their philosophies will determine whether or not we can project ahead into 21 with additional revenue. As it stands now, the first question people ask me whenever it comes to any of these things is, what's going to happen to my taxes, my county property taxes? Keeping in mind that county property taxes are probably 20% of your total bill. Between the town, the village, and the county, the three of us together is probably a third of your taxes, 2/3 of it in the school district. But nonetheless, raising property taxes to close the gap isn't an option. You might raise them a little bit within the tax cap, but we don't generate enough money to close a gap this size. So we would have to cut expenditures, and we'd have to do it dramatically. And we'd have to do it within the fact that the state and the feds require us to do certain things. We must run a county jail. That's not optional. We must treat sewerage. That's not optional. We must have certain departments of county government, like a county health department. That is a mandate. Probation department is a mandate. I can't cut those departments arbitrarily. The arbitrary things are parks, the bus system, and their necessities are valuable things. And my whole philosophy was not to come into office to cut things. I thought that we could intelligently grow them and improve the quality of life of Westchester County. So, in the reversal of the way the world works, the guy who wants to cut government isn't in office at the time the guy who comes in and wants to improve government at the very time we may have to cut government. So we'll see how we handle it. I'm going to try to be as rational and as inclusive as I can. But we also see a couple of trend lines, going to your question, that I think are interesting. We don't want to see the diminution of New York City. That does not help us at all. However, there's great demand of people in New York City to come up to Westchester County. We're seeing right now the house rental market is unbelievable. You talk to any, and there's many of you here who are realtors, the desire to either rent or buy land in Westchester County to leave the city is a strong demand. And we may see some of that in the office rental market as well. And if we do see that, then that may give us a rebound a little faster than we might expect. If it's at the expense of New York City and New York City is destabilized, that obviously is a problem. But we're not going to gloat about it, but we'll take advantage of the general situation that we have to deal with. We're not anticipating having so much growth that it will offset the loss of sales tax completely, but it is a helpful sign. But when we consider how people interact with the economy, just consider yourself. Each of you answer the question in your own mind. I'm pretty clear about my age. I'll be 67 in a couple of months. People of a certain age, and many of us are in this age category, come up with the question: do I go out of the house? Do I go to a restaurant, public restaurant? Do I feel safe? Do I feel safe when I'm outside of the restaurant? Do I feel safe when I'm inside of the restaurant? Do I feel safe going to a store, going to a mall, going to a small retailer in the heart of our communities on Larchmont Avenue, Chatsworth Avenue, Mamanic Avenue? And every single person is making that decision individually. And so even when we open up something, we don't necessarily assure that we're going to have the full revenue return that we had before. So the answer to the economic question is, it is one part our policies and how we handle them, and it's one part the consumer confidence of the people in our county and whether or not they feel comfortable. And that may not, necessarily trigger on what's happening in Larchmont and Mamaroneck or in Westchester. It may trigger on what they're hearing nationally about, the effect of the pandemic. And, even if we control it in Westchester County brilliantly, and in Larchmont and Mamanic and Rye brilliantly, there are other parts of the country that are not doing that. And that serves as a destabilizing factor, I think, for all of us. As far as the circumstances that deal with our areas with poverty, it is very difficult, and it's impossible to separate poverty from race and from the fact that there is the implicit bias that we all have seen over the years in our institutions. We're talking about it now in our policing, but we're talking about it really in everything. And how we reform that in every way is critical, not only in the area of policing, but in the area of housing, in the area of education, in the area of healthcare services. One of the things that we saw was that we had worse outcomes in our poorer neighborhoods in Westchester County, places like Mount Vernon, south side of Mount Vernon, where I grew up and lived for the first 25 years of my life, because they didn't have the same healthcare facilities. They have one hospital that's closing down. People didn't have mobility necessarily. When we opened up the mobile testing site in Glen Island, you have to get in a car to do it. We have cars. Not everybody has cars. And so until they had urban testing sites where you could walk up and test, you had an untested portion in some of the poorest communities in the county. Tip my hat to Shelley Mayer. She went to bat aggressively to get an urban center in Portchester. And that was necessary. Steve Otis's assistance as well. Those are the kind of things that, because I'm in government and I know all my government colleagues, most people don't see from the outside looking in. We know that one of the other problems we have in our poorer communities is the question of how we isolate people. It's one thing to have a beautiful home, 6, 7 rooms, single family. I'm empty nested. If I have to isolate, that's not a big thing. If I'm one of 3 or 4 kids in an apartment building complex with only a couple of rooms in the apartment, I share a bedroom with 1 or 2 siblings. How do you isolate? How do you isolate effectively? The county's tried to help with that where we can through the DSS program and isolate people in motels. That's not an ideal living situation, but you have to take them out of the situation they're in so they don't affect other people. And that is another element of what the poverty situation is. I want to compliment the Larchmont Mamanic Hunger Task Force as part of the overall food distribution network in Westchester County, Feeding Westchester and the various places, Hope Community Services in New Rochelle and Caritas and Portchester and all around the area. The county has put more money into trying to combat food insecurity. We have, under normal circumstances, a lot of people that don't have sufficient food. And then when you have so many people unemployed, and some of those unemployed undocumented, so they're not eligible for unemployment insurance protection, you've had a real problem with food insecurity over the course of this pandemic. And the folks who are involved in delivering food have done so at a much higher level of people, double the number of people involved. I met yesterday with the new head of Feeding Westchester, Karen Essen, and Erin, rather. And as we spoke, they have a major task. But locally, the Larchmont Mamanic Task Force, Malcolm Froman, who's out there somewhere, I guess, watching, is prominent in that. And we're very fortunate to have that. And I will tell you, even in communities like Larchmont and Mamanic that are perceived to be wealthy communities, there is food insecurity, there's need and necessity. And there are some wealthy communities in this county that don't have an equivalent of that. So the volunteer spirit in these three communities have really been essential, because the county can't really create the infrastructure to do it. We can fund it and assist it, but we can't create it from scratch. And the fact that it exists is there. That's one of the major issues. Also for poor people, one of the major issues is housing availability. And our administration, we've talked about this the last time I visited, is deeply committed to building affordable housing. We're working on about 1,400 units. We just launched an 82-unit project in Peekskill, of which we were participant in it. State put big money in it. Other entities were in it as well. But we mean business about building affordable housing. And I will tell you, and this may be a little controversial to say this, we're not going to get hung up on the argument of the housing settlement, which was really an argument over units in those communities that didn't have affordable housing. We want to build affordable housing everywhere. We want it in the wealthy communities, but we want it in the communities that need it and have already had affordable housing, but need more of it. And I think we've gotten caught up in an argument over the prior administration over whether or not community A or community B has done their fair share. We have to get them to do their fair share, but we have ignored doing affordable housing where we need it in other communities. And that's foolish, because we did an affordable housing report that came out at the end of the year. We had a series of meetings just before COVID hit with municipal officials. This need is universal. And that, Nina, to the point of the communities of poverty, is also essential, that they have proper housing as well as others. We don't deal with education. Obviously, that falls to the local school districts and the state government. Though that level of issue also has to be dealt with when we deal with poverty. I don't know if I covered all of these issues except what I'm going to do in the future. What plans does the county have to deal with local businesses? Well, we've taken $500,000 of IDA funds, and we've created a grant and loan program for small businesses. We've had about 100 applicants, and we're providing them grants or loans to help them with PPE requirements, because every store has got to have, masks and other things for their staff as well as for the people that come in and visit. And we've also worked very closely with businesses to help them apply for the various federal programs. You get a small business, they don't have the manpower to apply for these protection programs, no matter what level of benefits there are. And so I think Bridget Gibbons and our economic development team, Deb Novick, who lives in Larchmont, if you know Deb is on our team now. And they've been very, very aggressive about working primarily through the local chambers of commerces. And Sherry Rosen Asher on our team has been a regular participant in all the local chamber meetings, as I have been, and the other local elected officials are. And I should tell you, as a segue, I go to Chamber of Commerce meetings all over the county. You never get, when you go to the Mamaroneck Chamber of Commerce, the Larchmont Chamber of Commerce, the kind of participation from local officials. Jane Eney is always there. Lorraine Walsh is always there. These people, Nancy Selleck's and the whole group, I'm not trying to pick some and not others, but they go to local Chamber of Commerce meetings every month. That is not the norm when you go elsewhere in the county. So I think in that regard, we have a unique backyard, but we've tried to assist local businesses. So I think I did, at rapid New Yorkese speed, every one of the issues you've mentioned, except the last one, which is the term limit issue. And by the way, this is a controversial issue. A lot of my friends who are, everyone knows I'm a Democrat, my fellow Democrats didn't necessarily think this is the right thing to do. And I made the argument that executive power is different from legislative power. Legislative power, you have to accumulate time and grade in order to be influenced. I did not talk about legislative term limits. I talked about executive limits. I think that the unitary power of the executive, which I now have for 2.5 years, needs to be restrained by time. I don't think that people should have 12 and 16 and 20 years to accumulate one person's vision, that there should be the ability to have people turn over, you come in, you do your thing, you go. I never was in a position as a legislator to do it because, you know, the executives oppose it and they veto the bill and it can't pass. Well, this time I'm the executive, so I was able to get it done. And we have a 2-term limit now in the Westchester County executive position. If I turn out to be the greatest county executive ever, which I won't be, there'll still be somebody else after me. So why not plan on trying to make sure that we're constantly looking for that next group of leaders to come up? And I think that's just practical, long-term decision-making rather than the individual who gets a position, they like it, they don't want to give it up. And as we're watching at the national level, you know, term limits applies to the presidency. You know, might not be a bad thing to have. So, and once I'm retired from that position, I hear there's some boards and committees and groups out there that need people to serve on their board and raise money and be good citizens. And even though I don't live in Larchmont or Mamanic, I've been attached to these communities for so long. I'm sure somebody will tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, George, how'd you like to come and be involved with us?" And I'm sure I'll say yes. In fact, I'll probably say yes too much. I'll get to that when we get there. So with that, I've tried to answer those questions, and I'm, I guess, ready to take any other questions you'd like to have. We didn't touch much on the rise of the racial justice issue. We can talk about that in the questions if you'd like. Power outages, a little more of a state issue. We can touch on that. And anything else you'd like?
Well, the one question, George, the one question that I don't think was addressed by you yet that we had raised in our initial series of questions was concern. You've addressed housing, but the more immediate concern to the poorer communities is evictions, and also specifically, well, what assistance can the county provide both to landlords who have to pay their mortgage, but to tenants who don't want to be evicted? And do you support a right to counsel in eviction proceedings legislation?
Well, I think there should be a right to counsel situation. The problem comes down to the money necessary to pay for that counsel. And if the state were to pass a law to require that statewide, that would become another unfunded mandate on county government, as we generally now are the entity that pays through either legal services for things like evictions, or in other ways legal aid for criminal cases, and the county winds up paying it. We have contracts with legal services of the Hudson Valley to deal with eviction prevention. We have gone through those contracts recently and gone back and forth a little bit to see where we stand in terms of the resources we have available. We intend to add to those resources. We also intend to add to programs where we're going to pay back rent more profoundly to landlords on behalf of residents. But when I talk about expanding, and that's the nature of the question, can the county expand its services? How do I do that when I have been gutted financially? And if the state is going to reduce the money that we receive for things that we've done. I mean, we embraced Raise the Age. What was Raise the Age? Raise the Age was create a separate area of incarceration for 16 and 17-year-olds. Don't put them in the general prison population. That was a mandate that came down. Westchester County went ahead and developed a 30-unit facility to do exactly that. Most other places did not do that mandate. That cost us $38 million, of which we were supposed to be fully reimbursed by the state for year one. Mm-hmm. Well, 20% of that's going to be withheld. So 20% of 38 million, $5 to $6 million we should have gotten, we're not going to get. And we're punished because we embraced the philosophy and also the implementation of something that we know was a necessity. So when we talk about eviction protection, we're fully ready to do as much as the county can do once this flood hits. And it is going to be a flood, and it's going to be horrific. And but by the same token, and I know the state will say it doesn't have the money. So, okay, federal government. We have to turn to the federal government in this moment of crisis to help us financially. And this is for an expense that we haven't yet sent. We haven't yet expended. And I'm afraid that right now the current administration of Washington doesn't care, just does not care about these things. It's like tough luck, because many states don't get involved at all in these issues. They don't care. It's not their philosophy or their ideology. So I'm afraid, Nina, the reality is the county is going to be as aggressive as we can with the resources we have to assist those individuals. If we create a program of right to counsel, and it's a worthy thing to do, the money to provide that counsel has to come from somewhere. And the unfortunate reality is Westchester County government does not have the additional resources on its own to be able to fund that kind of a program. We can fund part of it, a significant part of it, but not all of it. And there has to be some additional resources if we can make that real, if we're going to pass the law. Just like passing the law for raise the age, just like passing the law for discovery and bail reform, laudable goals. We agree with the philosophy, we embrace the philosophy, we spend money to implement it, and then we find that we're not going to get reimbursed as promised. And that then becomes back to the fiscal problem.
Thank you. I think we'll be taking questions. So I believe the process is for people to raise their hands. I'm going to turn to LMC to guide me along on this. Is that how we normally do these? Is it an icon for people to raise their hand if they want a question to be asked?
Yes, any attendees, they should see at the bottom of their screen a raise your hand button. If you hit that, a little blue hand will appear next to your name and we would allow you to speak if you have a question. And Nina, if you click on participants.
I'm looking for it, yeah.
Yes.
I think I see them. So Peggy Jackson has a question. She's first on my list, okay? Peggy, you can unmute.
Oh, you know what, Nina, it's Christy Derrico. I think I got Peggy's invitation and that's why I came up as Peggy. I didn't have my own invitation. So in any event, George, always good comments. You're always so well informed and a good speaker. So two things, just jumping off of what you said about the evictions. Yeah, we still can't evict in the courts, but yes, we are anticipating a flood. Mamaroneck is considered, I'm sure you've heard of this term, pocket of poverty. It's hard for the tenants there to get the resources that people in cities get. And that makes it difficult in times of eviction where people might be without funds. But one suggestion with the dilemma you've raised, I sit as a raise the age judge and I volunteer and I do it 2 weeks a year with probably, I don't know, maybe 60 other judges. Maybe it's less than that. Maybe it's 30 judges. We're not compensated. Why can't we utilize the resources in our community, volunteers, to help people with these, negotiating evictions and things like that? That's just a suggestion. The second thing I just want to put out there that I wanted to bring to your attention, we used to have a couple of homeless people that would routinely come before our court, and I won't get into the issues, but you always knew them by name, knew them by face, saw them on the street. Yes, I would routinely give $20 to this one gentleman or buy him food, and I knew them. In just 1 week in court, I had 2 defendants who were homeless. And I have noticed a lot of homeless people out on the street, more than I've noticed in years, and their faces I don't recognize. So it's not something that I don't know if it warrants a response. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. We're going to be looking to have a connection with county services so we can refer these people somewhere, but it's something that I noticed was taking place, and I wonder if you've noticed that and what's going on.
Well, Christy, it's clearly there are more people in need now through this crisis than there were previously. And, the system of social services, as imperfect as it is usually the first line of defense for these folks. And we do have homeless drop-in shelters. We have some homeless facilities and services that are available for individuals. And you're right about one thing, that the tendency is to think in terms of the big cities, Yonkers, Mount Vernon at the top of the list, Peekskill up north, New Rochelle, White Plains, and not realize that it does exist in other parts of the county. Mamaroneck Village, Portchester along the Sound Shore also have relevance of this. I think when you talk about the volunteer involvement, I think in terms of the Community Resource Center, I gather Gerondi's here, I've kind of scanned the participants list, and the Community Resource Center provides that linkage for people. But of course, people have to know it exists and be willing to accept help. And one of the problems that we always have with folks who are homeless is some people are homeless and are off the grid and want to stay off the grid for whatever reasons. And sometimes it's mental issues. Therefore, our mental health professionals in the county have to then become involved to deal with a person who prefers to stay on the street rather than try to find those services. And we can't mandate certain things, as you know. There are certain limits to what we can do administratively. But I do think that around the county, there are non-legal organizations like Community Resource Center, which serves as the ability to reach the people who are suffering through these fears about being evicted, and can help get the kind of assistance so that they become the voice, the advocates for those individuals. And that is part of the program that I guess we're in the process of rolling out, that is going to be, within the course of the next month or so, announced. The biggest problem is the volume, and what you're evidencing just in your anecdote about the homeless is multiplied in 100 different ways. That where we had a need of 2, we now have a need of 4. And we don't know if our infrastructure is going to be able to provide enough for all of those people. And we have to try to be ready for it. So I'll take your input as as what we have to work on to try to be able to help and reach as many of these people as we can, more than we had before.
Thank you.
And just so you know, Christy, that the Community Resource Center is working on a program to recruit, working with the Hudson Valley Legal Services and other legal service organizations to recruit attorneys who would take on the job of assisting people who are facing eviction. So there'll be more about that program as it's developed, and I'll keep you posted on that one.
You know what?
Just point out, can I just add to that? Let me just point out that Hudson Valley group can deal with those who are undocumented. Legal Services of Hudson Valley cannot,
Right.
And DSS cannot deal with undocumented based on the rules.
I'll follow this up with you offline. Those are really helpful comments. Thank you.
Our next question is from Nancy Seligson. Nancy, you can unmute. Nancy, unmute.
Here I go. It let me unmute. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to point out that and thank George Latimer and his team in the county for all they have done to support the local municipalities, all of us, not just the governments, all of us during the pandemic. The county has been a leader and has been a supporter of all of us. And it's been very, very difficult. We needed their leadership. It was an opportunity for us to all share information, to interpret information. The executive orders coming down from the governor were not easy to understand, not easy to operationalize. And having the county's legal team and operations team help us determine that really was helpful on the ground for all of us. And their leadership has also guided us in how to look at things in the community. So I just wanted everyone to know that, it's hard sometimes to understand the county level of government, but it really made a difference for the entire county and especially our region during this time. And we continue to count on them. We continue to have weekly phone calls with the county as municipal leaders to talk about the pandemic situation and how to deal with all of it. I just wanted to let everyone know, of course, I have mentioned it before, but George, I want to say thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. That's very gracious. And Nancy and her team, Tom Murphy, Jerry Barbieri and his team, Lorraine Walsh and Justin Pino and his team. I want to leave out Steve Altieri in the town. They've really been magnificent to work with. I just want to make one general comment before you go to the next question. I operate, and I think many of us in local government, and I consider myself in local government at the county level, we are really a big, big town. We're not a little Albany. I think we work on a basis of personal friendship and appreciation. And that's on both sides of the aisle with our Republican friends as well. What's happening in Washington is Washington. What happens in our backyard is I know Nancy and Nancy knows me. I know Lorraine and I know Carol on her board and I know Sarah and I deal with Victor on the village board and I deal with Kelly. And these are people to me. They're first name people. When we talk about organizations. The Lions Club is out there, but the Lions Club is Phil Oldham and Jag Rayo. They're people to me. And that's the way we've tried to run this county government. Not like, oh, well, we're the next level of government up and we're distant. We have regional responsibilities, not yours. It's the same George, Phil, Jag, Nancy, Jane, relationships and the Ninas and the Elaine relationships. And that I really think is what's missing in government when I look at it from a broader level. But you have from your state legislators, county legislators, Catherine Parker, the county administration, the local governments, the not-for-profit organizations, we're just working with each other as people. And if somebody calls me up and George, you didn't do this, you should have done this, I take it to heart and we try to change. None of this, well, you have to see me on Wednesday when we have our discussion. And I really think it makes a big, big difference in the way government and not-for-profit and business and clergy all work together. When you drop those barriers, just work together and you try to solve problems.
Our next question is from, well, he disappeared. I thought it was Simon Marlowe. That's what I have an indication. Simon, if you're there and still have a question, could you please unmute?
Here we go. Good morning, George. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Simon.
As you know, I'm involved with Aging in Place at Home on the Sound. And one of the things that concerns us is the fact that if you look at the global picture of the pandemic, countries like Portugal, which were fine, Israel, which is just closing down as a country, Melbourne, which Australia was in great shape, and all of a sudden it's become a hotspot. New Zealand, which was one of the best countries in terms of management, is now got a major issue. There's going to be a second wave. And one of the issues that we've seen is that whilst a number of us do wear masks and do practice social distancing, it is spotty. So I'm wondering whether anything can be done to prepare for a potential second wave in terms of a type of mandate that everybody should at least wear a mask, because right now it's becoming very haphazard and casual.
Well, Simon, you know, in anticipation of the second wave, we have certain resources that we've set aside. We lost the use of Glen Island Park this year, which was our largest beach and a great place for picnicking, because we turned it over to testing. And even though we're not going through the same level of testing right now that we did at the outset of the pandemic, we're allocating that because we think if this thing spikes, we're going to need to be more profound in testing again. We set aside the county center, which we use for multiple purposes. I was on the court for a basketball game on February, whatever it was, 20-something. And a month later, we had hospital beds carved out for 110 emergency rooms if we need it. And that's at the ready if the second wave hits and if it is more profound. I want to apologize because my next door neighbor is doing their lawn, and you're going to hear lawn sounds in the back, and I don't know how to factor that out by the beach here. So we do understand pretty clearly that the second wave is possible, it's precedented, and we're certainly concerned that that we have the resources necessary. As far as the mask commitment is concerned, any of us locally, certainly could pass a law. The problem won't be the legal element of it. The process will be the enforcement of it. And I think any of us who have local police forces realize that we don't have enough manpower to enforce it across the board easily enough. And I might add, right now we're having a whole debate about the role of police in the society and their interaction with the civilian population. And so now we would throw on that probably one of the most difficult to enforce situations of enforcing mask usage. So we've been in dialogue with the governor and try to anticipate whether there would be state orders to do that. Because if the state orders it, we still have to enforce it. It's still going to be the Larchmont police, the Mamanic village, the Mamanic town, the Westchester County police that would have to enforce these things if it happens. So the mandate for mask wearing is, I view as a later in the process resort. We have to try to use public education, a little bit of public, what's the right word I want to say, sort of peer level influencing to try to get that quadrant of people that don't wear masks to wear masks. And I would say, just very subjectively, non-mask wearers fall into three categories. Number one, forgot to wear it, not mindful of it. Number two, young people, kind of this ain't affecting me, and I'm just reaching my young adulthood. I don't want to restrict myself with a mask. And then number three, people who have a strong ideological opposition. It's tied to their political beliefs, and they are aggressive about fighting back against wearing masks. The first two categories, I think we can make some progress with. The guy forgets the mask. Hey, buddy, here's a mask. Put it on. Use it. The second category, young people. This is no time to kid around. Wear a mask and have some enforcement. That last piece, I think, is going to be problematic. It's a lot smaller percentage in Westchester than in other places, but I have seen some folks. They're aggressive. They're looking for a fight. They're looking for a rumble because they have an ideological belief behind their freedom to not wear a mask. And I'm not sure that's going to be productive. I would say we do as much as we can, get as much compliance as we can, make sure we don't have mass gatherings to the greatest extent possible. And if we can get up into that 80, 85 range of compliance, I think we'd be wise. But that last 15%, I think you'll have a problem. I really do believe that, because I've talked to people that aren't wearing masks, and I watch the look in their eyes when they have that ideological opposition, and they want to rumble. They really do. I think we have to admit that and know that that's part of why some people don't wear masks.
Thank you.
I
Unmute.
think Susan Goldberger has a question. Please unmute.
Go to the next.
Okay, the next looks to me like it's back to Nancy Seligson. Do you have another question or comment, Nancy? I'm seeing a lot of mute. Do you have another question or
Hello,
who's speaking?
Susan Goldberger.
Please ask your question, Susan. I'm seeing a lot of mute. Do you have another question or
Hi, George. Good morning.
who's speaking?
Hi, Susan. How are you?
Susan Goldberger.
Please
Hi.
ask your question, Susan.
Sure.
I'm seeing a lot of mute. Do you have another question or-
Hi, George. Good morning. Wait. One at a time.
Hi, Susan. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Susan, if you can just
Sure.
mute your TV, please.
I was wondering if you could update us as, you know. I'm good, thank you.
Susan, if you can just mute your TV, please.
Can you please give us, if you could update us as, you know, on the situation with Con Ed. As you know, we suffered for more than a week without power. On the situation with Con Ed, as you know,
I'm hearing an echo, Susan. I don't know if everybody is.
Yeah, we are.
There's an echo effect here. So, but the issue.
On the situation with Con Ed,
Should I? Can we correct that?
Sean, is there an adjustment that LMC Media can make?
I don't know if Susan, maybe she might have her TV on or something where she's watching the meeting. That's my guess with delay.
When I usually hear that on Zoom meetings, it usually means that there is somebody is on two venues. They're on the iPad and they also are on the phone or something. But in any event, so Con Ed
Okay,
is,
that's the problem. I apologize.
Now unmute, Susan.
well, I think Susan's question was about the Con Edison situation. And of course, when Hurricane Isaias came through, I'm always happy when I pronounce that name right, because I don't always pronounce it right. It was a fast-moving storm, and it surprised us because we didn't have the hype of it as we did with Hurricane Irene or Superstorm Sandy. And the winds were significant and knocked us out badly. And Con Edison, and they weren't alone, same story in Long Island, northern New Jersey. The utilities were not staffed up and ready to go to resolve the issue quickly enough. And many of us went a long period of time without power. The issue is now before the state government. The state PSC, Public Service Commission, has the ability to regulate Con Edison and the other utilities. And I might add, Altice, which also had some significant failures in performance. And unfortunately, the PSC historically has not, really been effective in really restructuring the way these utilities work after these problems. The state legislature and Steve Otis and Shelley Mayer can speak more eloquently to this, held a marathon public session about 3 weeks ago in which they brought in the various individuals who questioned them very directly over an extended period of time. And ultimately, it's the state PSC that has the leverage over Con Edison. Those of us in local government, again, the towns, the 2 villages, the county government, we have no particular leverage over Con Edison or, for that matter, any of the utilities to be able to get them to comply. I will give you my personal opinion, and we haven't done an exhaustive study of this. There's lots of different things that are talked about as the solution. The solution is burying the wires underground, very expensive, and then other problems happen underground with wiring that requires you to retrench and fix things. That is not necessarily a panacea. Trimming of trees helps, but the storm that we saw took whole trees down that we would not have caught in any tree trimming program. The real question in my mind is insufficient permanent staff to be available to handle these incidents, and any kind of a reserve force that is in the that's in the wings that can be called upon when a crisis hits. Clearly, you can't build the church just for the major celebration. As we would say in my faith, you can't build a church sized for the people who are going to show up on Christmas. But you have to have more on-duty staff. And Con Edison and the other utility companies have reduced their staff to the crews that would go out and do this, and they rely on mutual aid to solve the problem. But when you get a broad-based problem, when a hurricane comes in, mutual aid is coming from 500 miles away. It's not one town away as mutual aid in the fire department does. And so I think the PSC has got to require Con Edison and other utilities to carry a larger staff and incentivize that in order to deal with these. You have more crews out there. And I also think they should investigate the concept of a reserve corps, people who are retired electrical workers, people who might be in other somewhat related areas, electricians, maybe not utility workers, but people who would go through an annual training. And then just like the volunteer fire department, they're called upon when needed in a moment of crisis, and they get paid a certain amount every year just to maintain their training levels. But then all of a sudden we have many more crews out there, because simply put, when enough of these trees go down, Con Edison and the other utilities too, they're not alone. They just do not have enough crews to go out there and to cut the wires and turn off the power. They do not have enough crews out there. It takes them 7 days, 5 days, 3 days to handle Westchester County. And Westchester is not like New York City. New York City is an urban environment. And so they naturally focus on New York City, because whenever they put time and energy in, they can say, hey, we got 2,000 customers back with this one fix. Well, Westchester is less densely populated. It's always going to get less attention, because when you do that fix, you put 200 people on, not 2,000 people. And those are some of the structural things I think our state legislators will advocate for. But ultimately, it's the PSC, which is under the control of the governor. It's the governor's appointees that will have to address this. And we'll see if they do this time around. The anger is tremendous. And I must tell you, I drove around that weekend and people yelling at me. I went up and down, places in Mamanic town and elsewhere. I'm the living presence, or Nancy is, or Tom is, or Lorraine is. We're the living presence of the government, but we don't have any control. And I stopped by and I looked to see a situation. People yell at me, how can you tolerate this? Why don't you do something? You must do something. I don't have any power to do that. You need to understand the way the system works. The local governments have no authority to tell Con Edison, you will do this. And unfortunately, it's going to reside in the PSC to be the solution.
Am I muted? I see that it looks like Nancy has her hand raised again, and that would probably be about our last question. Nancy, do you have another question?
No, I'm so sorry, Nina. I forgot to lower my hand.
No problem. If there are no more questions, I want to personally thank George for his service and for attending tonight and for leading us through this crisis. And I'm going to turn this over then to Elaine to tell us what's happening next, because I'm not really sure what's happening next.
Again, I want to thank George. I want to thank you, Nina, too, for hosting all this. It's been quite a session this time. I want to thank all of you for tuning in. And also I want to urge you to come back again next month. That would be October 13th, when our topic will be domestic abuse. Thank you again for attending. Again, thank you, George, and thank you, Nina. See you
And
next.
thank you, LMC.
And thank you, LMC, for hosting all of this too. Thank you.
Take care all. Stay safe.